Dungeon Reaper. A light novel by Bloodmoss. Chapter 1. The Last Delivery. The 1994 Geo Metro rattled like a toolbox tumbling down a flight of stairs on the uneven streets of Crystal Gate. The once quiet city had grown noisy and chaotic since the awakening phenomena began 5 years ago. Billboards advertised guild recruitment drives, promising fame and riches to those brave enough to face dungeons. Posters on street corners featured clean-cut adventurers posing heroically, weapons gleaming in exaggerated sunlight. A few signs boasted about guilds lucky enough to have alchemists, highlighting their ability to brew potions, an invaluable advantage in a world where healing was otherwise a slow and painful process. "Come on, Battle Wagon, you've got one more in you," Kain muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. The pizza boxes stacked precariously on the passenger seat slid to the side as the car lurched over a pothole. He reached out to steady them, his other hand barely keeping the car on course. He pulled up outside the Azure Fong Guild's HQ, a sleek office building that somehow managed to exude smugness. The guild emblem, a snarling black wolf, was etched into the glass doors, glowing faintly under the dim streetlights. Kain parked by the curb, the metro giving one final, pathetic wheeze as he turned off the engine. Rain drizzled steadily, pattering against the cracked windshield and pooling on the uneven street. With a resigned sigh, Kain reached over to the manual window crank. He turned it slowly, the mechanism creaking in protest as the glass slid down. Cold rain splattered onto his arm as he leaned out to grab the broken door handle from the outside. "Yeah, this is fine," he muttered, yanking the door open and stepping out into the drizzle. His shoes landed in a shallow puddle, soaking through instantly. Perfection. Balancing 2 pizza boxes, Kain trudged up the steps and entered the lobby. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, save for the chatter of adventurers lounging on modern leather couches. They radiated confidence in their reinforced gear, weapons propped casually nearby. "Delivery for Sarek," Kain announced to the room. A tall man in combat boots strode forward, flanked by a hulking dog that could only be described as unnervingly demonic. Its black fur gleamed, and its red eyes glowed faintly as it snarled at Kain. Sarek ignored the tension as he snatched the pizzas from Kain's hands. "Finally," he said, opening the first box and grabbing a slice. The second box he tossed onto the tiled floor. "Fenrir. Dinner." The dog lunged at the box, tearing it open with a growl. Grease splattered across the floor as bits of crust flew in every direction. "Seriously?" Kain said, glancing from the mess to Sarek. "You couldn't just put it in a bowl or something?" Sarek gave him a lazy smirk. "Fenrir likes it this way. Builds aggression." "Yeah, I'm sure that's what all the best dog trainers recommend," Kain muttered, taking a step back as the dog snapped up the last of the pizza. Sarek reached into his pocket and flicked a single coin at Kain. It hit his chest and clattered to the floor. "Here's your tip. Work harder, maybe you'll graduate to dungeons one day," Sarek said before turning away. Kain clenched his jaw, the coin feeling heavier than it should as he picked it up. The other adventurers barely acknowledged him as he left, the faint growling of Fenrir still audible behind him. Outside, the metro was still ticking from the heat of its overworked engine. As Kain slid back through the window and shoved the key into the ignition, a voice on the radio caught his attention. Another report about rising dungeon anomalies, the announcer's voice sharp and precise. And experts warn that collapse events are becoming more frequent, leaving many questioning the Dungeon Regulation and Oversight Bureau's ability to manage guild resources and enforce safety standards. Kain tightened his grip on the wheel, muttering under his breath. "Yeah, because Drob's precious safety regs are doing wonders for people like me. Gods forbid they let someone untested get a shot." Deep down, though, he knew the truth. His lack of experience wasn't their fault or the guild's. No one wanted to risk bringing a liability into a dungeon, especially with collapse events looming. But if they'd just let him start, let him prove himself, he could level up, train harder, be better. He could be someone. He sighed and pressed the accelerator, the metro sputtering in protest as the guild's glowing emblem disappeared in the rearview mirror. The studio apartment was as cramped and uninspiring as Kain's adventure rank. A single window leaked pale light from a nearby street lamp, illuminating the pile of unopened guild rejection letters on his tiny table. The room was sparsely decorated, mostly because he couldn't afford decorations, with a futon shoved against one wall and a lopsided shelf holding a sad collection of half-read dungeon guides. Kain sat cross-legged on the futon, his legs surrounded by papers, overdue bills, past due notices, and the crown jewel of his financial misery, a nearly maxed-out second credit card. He stared at the neon orange, minimum payment required, warning as if sheer willpower might erase it. "Well, at least I'm consistent," he muttered, tossing the statement onto the growing pile. His aid chip HUD hovered just at the edge of his vision. He swiped it open with a practiced motion, revealing his stats. Dungeon Regulation and Oversight Bureau, DRB. Adventurer Registration Information Packet. Name: Kain Thorn, registered alias. Legal name: Keith Noland. Registration ID: DRB AF T15289017. Affiliation: Freelance Adventurer, unaligned. Rank: F tier, provisional. Attribute score: out of 100. Strength 10. Stamina 12. Speed 14. Mana 3. Performance record: no verified dungeon completions. Behavioral note: exhibits a tendency toward procrastination and overcompensation in social and professional scenarios. Employment status: currently unaffiliated with a guild or regulated adventure party. The last line might as well have been tattooed on his forehead. Pending review felt like the theme of his life. Kain groaned and flopped back onto the futon, staring at the cracked ceiling. "I left Pine Hollow for this?" he asked the universe, though it didn't seem inclined to answer. He thought he'd outgrown the flatline, its sleepy streets, low-magicked mundanity, and constant reminders that his awakening was barely enough to qualify for anything. But at least in Pine Hollow, he'd been something. A promising runner at school. The town's token, maybe he'll make it someday kid. Now, here he was, a failed adventurer living off pizza tips and chasing a dream that guild after guild had told him wasn't his to have. He picked up one of the unopened letters from the table and tore it open with a swipe of his finger. "Dear applicant," the letter began. "Thank you for your interest in the Stonehaven Explorers Guild." Unfortunately, Kain crumpled the paper before he could finish reading. "Unfortunately, my ass," he muttered, hurling it across the room. It hit the wall with an unimpressive thud and joined the pile of its predecessors in the corner. The truth stung more than the rejection letters. Guilds weren't rejecting him because of his lack of effort. They were rejecting him because he wasn't good enough, not yet, anyway. But how could he get good enough if no one would give him a chance? It was a maddening, unsolvable loop. His stomach growled, cutting through the self-pity. He reached over to his delivery bag, pulling out the single consolation prize of the day, a leftover slice of meat lovers, slightly cold and thoroughly depressing. "Breakfast of champions," Kain said, biting into the crust. It was chewy and tasteless, but it was free. The aid chip pinged faintly, drawing his attention back to the HUD. Beneath his unimpressive stats, a small notification blinked. Adventurer application, Hollow Blade Guild. Status: in review. Kain stared at it, the faintest spark of hope igniting in his chest. "They're still reviewing it," he said aloud, sitting up. He opened the application with trembling fingers, scanning the progress bar. It was almost too much to hope. If they approved him, even provisionally, he'd finally have a shot. His optimism lasted all of 3 seconds. The status changed. Status: denied. Kain threw himself back onto the futon and closed his eyes, letting the cold reality settle over him. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, muffling the faint sounds of the city. "Tomorrow," he muttered to himself. "Tomorrow, someone's gonna see my potential. Right?" The Hollow Blade Guild's HQ was a far cry from the polished halls of the Azurefang. The paint peeled from its brick walls, and the neon sign above the door buzzed faintly, the O flickering intermittently. It sat wedged between a pawn shop and a dive bar, the kind of place that screamed low-tier adventurers welcome. Kain pulled up to the curb, carefully maneuvering the Geo Metro into a tight spot. The engine sputtered to a halt, coughing once as if insulted by the task. "Stay here and don't embarrass me," Kain muttered, patting the dashboard before grabbing the delivery bag. Inside, the guild hall was loud and chaotic. Adventurers argued across mismatched tables, their weapons clattering against the floor. A lone fan spun lazily overhead, barely cutting through the warm, stale air. The receptionist, a young woman who, despite her age, looked like she'd seen it all, didn't bother to glance up as Kain approached the counter. "Delivery for Hollow Blade," he said, hoisting the bag. Before the receptionist could respond, a voice rang out from across the room. "We're short one." Kain turned toward the commotion. Four adventurers stood near the far wall, their expressions ranging from frustration to outright panic. "We can't go in with just four," the woman in leather armor shouted, her voice rising above the din of the room. Her short blonde hair stuck up in wild spikes, a clear sign she'd been yanking at it in frustration. "DRB regs are clear, minimum 5 for an E-class run." To emphasize her point, or maybe just vent her fury, she turned and slammed her fist into the nearest wall. The concrete gave way with a loud crunch, leaving a fresh hole surrounded by older, faded ones. Dust rained down as the room fell briefly silent. Kain blinked, noting the sheer number of similar fist-sized craters decorating the room. Starting to see why this place looks like a condemned boxing ring, he muttered under his breath. "Doesn't matter," she barked, shaking the dust from her knuckles as she rounded on the stocky man beside her. "We need someone, or we lose the slot." Kain hesitated, his heart pounding. He could walk out, deliver the pizzas, and go home to his crumpled rejection letters. Or he could take the chance. "Hey," he called out, stepping forward. "I can do it. I'll fill the slot." Four sets of eyes turned toward him. "You," the scarred leader said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Me," Kain said, straightening his back. "I've been between jobs, but I've got experience." The leader raised an eyebrow. "Aid stats. Now." Kain froze. Sure. 1 second." He swiped at the air, activating his aid chip, fumbling with the interface nervously. The glowing HUD flickered into view, and he struggled to make the "send stats" gesture. His finger slipped, and a notification popped up. "Broadcasting stats to local network." The room went silent for half a second, followed by a chorus of laughter. Even the receptionist let out a sharp snort, barely bothering to hide her amusement. "Seriously?" The teenage girl sat up from the desk, her grin wide and teasing. Her messy auburn hair and oversized leather jacket gave her a rebellious air, though the way she carried herself hinted at someone used to holding her own. She looked no older than 15, but her presence immediately demanded attention. "Wow," she said, mock admiration dripping from her tone as she scanned his stats again. "With numbers like these, you almost qualified to take my job as the paper pusher here. Wanna arm wrestle? I promise to go easy on you." Kain flushed, resisting the urge to shrink back. "Hard pass, kid," he muttered, adjusting his delivery bag on his shoulder. "Name's Penny," she said, crossing her arms and tilting her head. "And you're not getting out of this that easy. Come on, how about just 1 round? I'll even use my left hand." Before Kain could retort, a burly man stepped up behind her, resting a heavy hand on her shoulder. The resemblance was clear. This had to be her older brother, the tank of the group. He loomed over Kain, his armor clinking faintly as he leaned in. "Listen, delivery boy," he said in a low growl, "don't even think about holding my little sister's hand. To arm wrestle or otherwise." Penny rolled her eyes and elbowed him in the ribs. "Relax, big guy. Not everyone's dying to date me, you know." "Yeah, dying will be the issue here," her brother shot back, earning a few chuckles from the group. "Class F, that stands for fuck no. As in, No, you're not going with us, and definitely no, you're not touching my little sister. Kain gritted his teeth, holding his ground despite the heat rising in his face. Look, I know I'm not exactly what you want, he said, his voice louder than intended. But you need 5, and I'm here. Take it or leave it. The laughter subsided, and the group exchanged uneasy glances. Penny's grin faltered slightly as she glanced at her brother. The scarred leader sighed, running a hand down his face. Damn it, you all know what happens if we don't fill this slot? We lose the dungeon claim. That's money, reputation, and 3 months of work down the drain. Not to mention DRB breathing down our necks for wasting their time. He shot a glare at Penny, who shrugged unapologetically. You think they'll care that Bart bailed? No. They'll fine us anyway. We need 5, and he's the best we're gonna get right now. Fine, the blonde woman muttered. But don't touch anything. Last in, last out. You're carrying the gear. I'm not a porter, Kain protested. You are now, the leader snapped. Now shut it, load the gear, and move that piece of shit you're driving before someone thinks it's ours. Kain's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't argue. Instead, he jogged outside and shoved the metro into reverse, parking it a block down the street. By the time he returned, the adventurers were waiting by a battered van, their gear piled haphazardly on the curb. Suit up, we already submitted the paperwork, and if we leave now, we can be in and out before DRB can shut us down for even thinking about this insanity, the leader ordered, tossing Kain a worn leather jerkin. Kain had no gear. He wasn't ready for this opportunity, or any opportunity really. His adventure kit had been gathering dust since the last rejection letter, and he hadn't thought to bring it along with the pizzas. As he stood awkwardly by the van, debating how to explain his lack of preparation, a soft chime sounded in his head. His aid chip's HUD flickered to life, displaying a bright green notification. Application approval. Congratulations on becoming a member of the Hollow Blade Guild. Kain blinked at the words, his heart doing an awkward flip. Wait, seriously? He muttered. He stared at the message, half expecting it to vanish. The blonde woman glanced over, arching an eyebrow. What's the holdup, newbie? Kain quickly dismissed the notification, straightening up. Nothing. Just processing the fact that I'm officially a guild member now. She snorted. Don't get too excited. You're here because we're desperate, not because you're special. The scarred leader tossed a worn leather jerkin at him, its buckles frayed and straps mismatched. Here, borrow this. Try not to get it torn up or you're paying for it. Kain caught the jerkin awkwardly and nodded. Right. Thanks. Totally appreciate it. He slipped it on, trying not to gag at the mildew smell. Ready, he said, his voice cracking slightly. The blonde rolled her eyes. Sure you are newbie. Let's just get this over with and you're paying for the pizza.